How's everybody doing? Everybody must be feeling some kind of market here. All right. Sorry, we're a couple minutes late. I was going to try to do this from the training room and then decided that I would just run it from my office. So, all right, we've got a lot of people. Abby, are you staying on for a minute to let these people in, or do I need to pay attention?
Yeah, I'll be on the whole time. I'll let people in for you.
Oh, okay. That would be awesome. All right. Well, welcome everybody. My name is Troy Marsh. I'm out of the consultant's office in Columbus, Ohio. I see quite a few names on here actually that I don't know. So that leads me to believe that maybe there are people here from outside of our 3 market center world that we usually live in. So welcome. I've been in real estate since 2004. Worn several hats from rainmaker to, well, actually from individual agent to buyer's agent to rainmaker. I was team leader for a little bit of time, then jumped back into sales again after COVID, and also an investor. And one of the things that I like to do for some weird reason is analyze data. And specifically around the real estate market. So I started doing this actually around COVID. I was doing it weekly and actually daily for a while during COVID when everything was just changing so rapidly. And then here a couple months ago, I started doing it kind of monthly because I also run the education calendar here at our office. So if it's okay with you guys, actually what I'd like to start with is, does anybody have anything specific that they want to get out of today? I have a slide deck prepared. But there's also a lot of stuff, I try to keep it relatively palatable. So if there's a specific topic you want to go over, we can maybe cover that at the end if I have some information on it. So you can just go ahead and unmute and let me know, or put it in the chat if there's anything specific. Don't everybody talk at once. All right. Well, if nobody has anything specific, I'll just jump into my slide deck. I'd love to have this be participatory. I know every person says that when they're running a Zoom, but definitely don't feel bad about interrupting me or putting some stuff in the chat. I know Abby's going to stay on here, so she'll try to let me know as well. But feel free to unmute if I miss you. So let me get my slideshow rolling here and then we'll get going. I need to share my screen first. All right, like I said, for those of you that don't know me, Troy Marsh here with Consultants. And basically what we're going to do today is just do what I would consider to be a relatively high level overview of the market. And I would kind of put the market currently into these 3 buckets. Last month, I talked a decent amount more about new construction for those of you that were here. There hasn't been a lot of changes. We've kind of stayed pretty stable in that world. We're still way underbuilt overall in terms of what we need versus what we have, but not a lot has changed. The numbers have stayed kind of at record highs. So there wasn't a ton of new stuff to report. But let's jump right in. Obviously, inventory and months of supply remained at an all-time low. I think my general audience today are real estate agents. I also, actually, I left this out, but I also coach agents from across the country. And one of the things I have begun to hear over the last couple of weeks is some people feeling their market shifting to some higher days on market. It seems to be very locally based, meaning I'm hearing it from some in a major way, some in a minor way, and some not at all. So if anybody has any anecdotal evidence, I'd love to hear that kind of at the end. I think that one of the things is everything definitely doesn't happen to the entire United States at one time or in one way. And so the great opportunity that we have by being in a room like this is definitely being able to share with each other, because normally things happen in one part of the country before they happen in another. So if we can all, for those of us that are lucky enough to be the lagging people, we might be able to begin to make changes to our business now to protect ourselves and learn from those of you who are already experiencing it. So I'd love if there is something like that in your world, I'd love for you to share. So the first thing I want to start with is new listings. For, obviously in order to have higher amounts of inventory, we have to have more new listings. And I really like this. I actually found this preparing for the class last year, and I've got sources at the end, and I'm going to put my email up. If you guys want to email me, I can send you the slide deck. But realtor.com every single month puts together these graphs, which I think are actually pretty good. So a lot of my information is coming from there. But all of these different colors here represent different years, and they're all down here at the bottom. But you can see the green line here represents last year, and then the yellow line represents this year. And all of these much bigger lines in terms of new listings represent years kind of pre-COVID. And then obviously the COVID year 2020 is this, I don't know what color you call that, but seafoam green maybe. And that was the really weird year that didn't follow the same seasonal trends. But the interesting thing is we've kind of held, for those of you that have been paying attention, you probably already know this, we've held similar trend lines to last year around new listings and inventory. But you can obviously see when looking at these different years, the reason why we're feeling the pinch with regards to currently active properties, because of the gap in new listings that we've been seeing. And that's nationally, but I would venture to guess that for most of us, if we pull our local numbers, which I have one slide here for Central Ohio, just because that's where I am and that's what I have access to, our trend lines across the country for the most part are very similar to this. So we were down 0.9% year over year in April versus April of 2021, probably a pretty much statistically irrelevant number. So we can say we're pretty much in the same place that we were before. I think the biggest thing, at least for those of us in Central Ohio and a lot of people, is what came out of this area here. So we started off the year in January a lot lower, and we haven't really made up that difference. If anything, we've been slightly lower every month. And therefore, that's what's causing us to kind of feel the pinch on this number, which is the active listings count. So those small dips each month ended up adding up to us staying well below last year in terms of active listing count. And that's about 12.2% year over year. And again, that's nationally. Now, another thing that I think most of us are feeling, and certainly some of the bigger markets are feeling it more than the smaller markets, but are the institutional investors. And then also what has come with limited inventory has been much more aggressive wholesalers and investors. And what that means to you as an agent is, I'm sure that if you're anybody that owns any investment property, or frankly, even if you only own one that you live in, you've probably gotten something like this. And ironically enough, this was sitting on my desk when I walked in 30 minutes ago. It wasn't even planned, but basically a postcard like this, and or 17 text messages a day from investors saying that they want to buy your house and that they're willing to pay cash and close quickly and make it easy on you. The reality is that those people are getting people to call them back, and they are selling their houses to those people. And so when you think about the number of sales that are happening off market that aren't showing up necessarily in these active and new listing counts, there is more activity happening than what we're seeing come through the MLS. And I think it's higher than ever between the new builds that are happening without hitting the MLS, and then also with those investors that are going straight to the consumer. And then you have people like Open Door, Zillow's obviously out of the game now, but all of those iBuyers that in areas, I mean, like markets such as Phoenix, I think the percentage is up over 6 or 7% of the total sales are done by iBuyers. And so that's taking a big chunk of opportunities. Pending sales are down 9.5% as well. So again, this is where if any of you guys are feeling a little bit of a pinch in your income, that hasn't been overcome by the increase in prices, it's definitely the fact that pending sales are down. I mean, look at the trend line. So we don't get paid until something closes. Pending sales are down 9.5%. This is a look, like I said, at our local market here in Columbus. Again, very similar numbers. So if we look at year to date compared to last year to date, these numbers here in terms of the for sale properties look exciting at plus 20%, but that's because it was taken out on the weekend. And come tomorrow or the next day, all those properties that listed this weekend will be in contract and that number will be back down. But you can see new listings basically up 0.5%. I think nationally they were down 1%, but the solds are down 4.3%. So again, that's what we're feeling in our bank accounts. So similar numbers across the board there. When we look at April, we were actually down. New listings year over year were down 2.6% compared to last year. And so overall, we're seeing a lot of the same things. So days on market continue to fall as well. So we're looking at trends from last year at six fewer days on market than April of 2021. And then most of you probably are feeling this as well. Median list price is still up 0.2% year over year. So I do think that this is probably the one thing. This is definitely one of those things that's going to change quite a bit. Depending on where you live. Some areas might be up 20 or 30%, and some areas might be up only 5 to 10%, but still, I think everybody's still seeing that. Is there anybody on this call right now that is seeing prices either level off or possibly even fall back currently? If you are, please share. No, nobody yet. Okay.
Hi, Troy. This is Stephanie Ross in Naples, Florida.
Okay.
I would say where I'm seeing a lot more what's called price reductions than I have in a long time. So it's making me think that we're starting to level off just because they were shooting for a higher price, and then they're realizing they're not getting that because people aren't doing what they were doing, say, back at the end of the year. So I think it's starting to level off, and the amount of reductions I've seen is a lot more than I saw over the past year.
Yeah, that's really good. And that's why I flipped through a couple of other slides, but yeah, price reductions. So this was something that we talked about last month. If you look at March, we had kind of been following all the other trend lines with regards to price reductions up until March, and then we bumped just above last year, March over March, and now in April we were up 1.3% compared to last April. And so it'll be interesting to see if that trend line continues. As you can see, it's kind of fun to look at these sometimes and realize that price reductions, we all feel it, right, as agents. But when you look at this graph, like price reductions increase a lot once you get to the middle of the summer and people realize they overpriced their house. But yeah, it's interesting. If we stay above this trend line, that's definitely what we would call a leading indicator, right? That buyers are just being less aggressive. I think what I've seen anecdotally in our market, and I'd be interested, Stephanie, on your feedback with this, is that, and I think you might have mentioned it, is that I don't necessarily know that the need for price reductions has grown, more so that it's becoming, you can't just list it at whatever you want and get it sold. But on the flip side, if you list it correctly, it'll sell for way more than it should.
The little drop down in the center where it says options right there.
Yeah.
Hold on.
Hey.
All right, go ahead.
No, I 100% agree. And I think that's what we're seeing is those people that came in and said, hey, let's give it a shot at this price over what the comps are showing are not getting that anymore as where they were at the end of the year. People were biting at those overpriced listings. Now it's like, no, is it? And just even the amount of people that have been asking me for comps recently is, I think, feel like rising as well, because they're realizing like, okay, we're not doing that. We're not paying that crazy overpriced anymore. And so I do agree with what you're saying.
Yeah, that's interesting. Anybody else? Naples, Florida's feeling it. Anybody else? I talked to another agent or a leader in Miami who said the same thing, actually, even as a month ago, was saying that, yeah, they were seeing higher days on market and definitely more price reductions. Anybody else from any other parts of the country seeing that significantly, or everybody else staying pretty much in line with the way things have been? I know we've got a lot of people with video off that might just be listening, which is completely fine. But if you are listening and can unmute, I'd love to hear about it.
Hi, I'm Almi from Dallas Fort Worth.
Yeah.
In Texas. So I agree with the other ladies that just talked. I think I'm seeing the same thing in this area.
Okay. Now, are you, along with the price reductions, are you seeing reductions in showings, or are you just seeing reductions in people actually pulling the trigger on stuff that's overpriced?
I think both.
Both? Okay.
Yes. Absolutely.
Okay, cool. Well, I appreciate you speaking up. Anybody else? No? Okay, cool. All right. So interest rates, it's really hard to not talk about interest rates, because I feel like first of all, the whole purpose of the Fed doing things to increase the interest rates is to slow things down. So if we are seeing things slow down a little bit, that's not by accident, it's really by design. This graph kind of clearly shows what has happened to interest rates in just a few short months. And being someone that lived through the downturn in 2008, it's crazy. I cannot remember a time where rates adjusted by this big of a margin in this small amount of time. And so it's been pretty crazy to see, a buyer that entered the market in January put in, 6 offers, didn't get any of them. And by the time they got one accepted, in April, their interest rate was 2% higher than it was when they first started putting in offers in January or February. So it definitely has an impact. And I think, it's hard to imagine that it's not going to have an impact on buyers, especially the higher up in price range that you go, the more impact that it has. So we've basically seen interest rates go from around 3%, 3.25%, up to 5.25%. They peaked as high as 5.5% in terms of a national average at the beginning of last week. Last week, they dropped off a little bit. But I think most people believe that they'll continue to inch up, at least, if not, go up a decent amount more. I've heard lots of opinions on that. But I haven't heard anybody calling for them to go down anytime soon. So at least significantly. I had this slide in last month, but I still feel like it's just insane. And when we talk about why I decided to do this class monthly is, I've always heard, and Gary Keller's one of my heroes, I guess. And he always says, you want to be the local economist of choice. And so I think sometimes as agents, we can fall into the trap of falling into the emotional roller coaster that comes with a market like this. Certainly, I remember back in 2010 and 11, when you have to sit across the table from somebody and tell them that they have to bring tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars to the closing table just to sell their house. And now I feel like we have people, we feel like we need to cry in their Cheerios with them when they lose their 10th house. to multiple offer, or they have to drop out of the market because they don't have the cash. With interest rates, I think putting things into perspective is sometimes valuable. And so this is a chart of interest rates of the 30-year interest rate since the 70s. And you can see that at no time prior to 2009 did we ever have a 30-year rate below 5%. Now, we've all become accustomed, and especially if you're an agent that's only been, I mean, I say only in quotes, I mean, 10 years as a seasoned agent. But over the last 10 or 11 years, you've almost never seen a rate above 5%. But for the previous 40 years, there was never a rate below 5%. So I think that's something that you can always talk to people about. It doesn't necessarily make them feel any better or make the pain any less. But again, it shows that you know what you're talking about, that you have an understanding of both the current and historical markets. And then this is, I think, one of the most relevant slides in here in terms of ways to talk to your clients about what the impact of the current market is on their life as a buyer or a seller, and what the buyers are feeling if they're a seller, and obviously what the buyers are feeling if they're the ones taking the mortgage. But this would be the difference in your monthly payment. This is obviously only the principal and interest portion, since taxes and insurance vary greatly depending on the area. But this is the difference between what your mortgage payment would have been in January versus what your mortgage payment would be today. So if you're getting a $300,000 loan, it was $351 difference. The $600,000 loan, you're talking $700 more per month in your payment over the course, change in 4 months. So that's a pretty intense change. And that kind of rolls right into, well, actually, I'm a slide ahead of myself. So also, one last thing on interest rates is purchase applications. Again, when we talk about demand, we really haven't seen demand drop much in terms of what it's looked like this year versus last year. It has dropped a little bit, and they measure that by the number of purchase applications, the new mortgage applications, but we haven't seen it drop nearly as much as we've seen rates go up. Not even close. The refinance applications are way down, but purchase applications have stayed pretty steady. So they were down, I think, 8% compared to last year, but they've actually been up week over week, which again, you would expect this time of year. I think this is the biggest part of the conversation when it comes to mortgage rates and the impact on the housing market. And I've got one more slide here to follow this to talk about, to put this really into crazy terms. But this is what the affordability was last month at the 4.4% interest rate. And then this is the payment to income ratio right here. So at 4.4% at the prices, the median price from last month, we were at a 29.1% ratio. So the only time that it had been higher than that was right before the mortgage fallout in 2008. Now this month, because rates have gone up and so have prices, we're up over 30% to 31.25%. So that means the average person, in order to buy an average house, in terms of what their payment is compared to the median income, they would be at 31% of their income would be going towards their mortgage payment. And this was another, and I've got the sources on this too. These guys, it's called blacknight.com. They do this whole report every single month. And that's where I get that slide from. But they said in July 2006, it took 34.1% of the median income to make a monthly P&I payment on the average price home bought with 20% down. And as of April of this year, or of 20, I think that's supposed to be 22. It's at 32.5%. So we're basically within 1.6% of the highest it's ever been recorded in terms of, and if you look at it the other way, the lowest level of affordability that's ever been recorded. So, and it says that 37 markets representing nearly a third of the country are now the least affordable that they've ever been. So I think when we're looking at, what's going to happen over the long term, it's hard to imagine that affordability is going to be able to stay at this level and continue with the same type of market. So I think that ultimately my conclusions on this kind of remain similar to what they were last month. Affordability will continue to dictate when things begin to flatten out. I do think that everything I've read, I haven't seen anybody raising the red flag saying, oh my gosh, the real estate floor is going to fall out, the prices are going to go down, everything is just going to crumble. But I do think that this is going to be locally based, and there are going to be some areas. My personal opinion is it's going to be areas that are largely that have been driven by vacation purchases. So I think Florida, you guys have enough people moving there. I don't know as much about your new construction trends. I know the South is building a lot, but I think I personally know 5 or 6 people that have moved to Florida because their jobs allowed them to work remote. And they're like, why am I going to live in Ohio if I can live in Florida and do the same job? So I think you guys are going to be somewhat protected. I own a lake house at Norris Lake in Tennessee. It's almost all second homes. And I think those markets are probably, it's hard for me to imagine those markets getting through any kind of reasonable recession without a drop in prices, because the second home, vacation home, is what people tend to get rid of as soon as finances get tight. So it'll be interesting to see. It's just a prediction based on what I've seen. But I think if you're a largely owner occupant based area, you're probably not going to see a major fallback in prices. You'll probably just see more of a flattening of the increase. I mean, we won't continue at a 10 to 20+% appreciation. I think possibly as well, some of these areas like Nashville and Austin, I have seen people say they've been appreciating at like 30 to 40% annually. And those markets are definitely at more risk of falling backwards, just because the people that have bought in the recent term are priced so much higher than everybody else. If there's a softening of the market, everybody else is going to have a lot more ability to price at what would we say historically competitive price. I think the other thing that could offset the affordability, remember there's 2 pieces to affordability. It's median price point. There's 3 pieces: median price point, interest rate, and then also median income. And so I do think that if we see wages follow the increase in prices, meaning I'm sure all of you have gone to the grocery store or at least paid a grocery bill that got delivered to you, and the prices of all that stuff is going up. Obviously, the workers that have to buy that especially on the lower end of the income scale, in order to just make a livable wage, they're going to have to make more money in order to afford those higher prices. So I think we've already seen it here in Central Ohio. It sounds like people across the country are seeing it as well, definitely at the lower end. If those wage increases continue to go throughout all price points in terms of wages, then I think obviously that impacts affordability in a positive way and makes everything feel more affordable at the current or even rising prices. So I think that'll probably be one of the big things that we'll be watching, but that also leads to inflation. So the Fed has a big job ahead of them in terms of fixing this and doing what they're calling a soft landing. So again, what am I looking for when I'm saying like, hey, we need to, ring the warning bell with regards to the housing market? Certainly, if lenders begin to lower their standards in order to continue giving loans to people. So one of the things that we haven't seen in this market very much of, but that we probably will start to see with rising rates, is the use of adjustable rate mortgages, because they're at a lower percentage. And so people can afford more house for the same payment by getting a 5-year ARM versus getting a 30-year fixed. Higher days on market, which we already talked about, more price reductions, which we already talked about, overbuilding. Again, I don't think nationally we're in any danger of being overbuilt anytime soon. I know locally here in Central Ohio, we're absolutely years away from being overbuilt, but there are areas, I know the South is building a lot more than we are here. It's that when they look at building, they break it up into 4 regions. It's like South, Midwest, Northeast, and West. I know the South area is building like significant, like 3 or 4 times as much as the Midwest. I think the area is larger, but either way. So that could be a local thing if you live in an area that's had a lot of building. And then also the last thing is just affordability getting out of control. I think at some point, right, in whatever market you live in, and again, wages are also relative to the area, but whatever market you're in, there will reach a point where the average person just can't afford to buy a home, and that will decrease demand if it hasn't already. So those are the things I'm looking for. When you start checking off more and more of those boxes, you definitely need to start letting your clients know. And for those of you that are already seeing increase in price reductions, definitely my advice on that, if you're not already doing it, have those conversations with the sellers up front, because remember that the news is always a month or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 behind reality. And so, you know, the stories that are coming out in the news are still about the red hot housing market. And so if you're not educating your clients on what today's reality is, they're not going to be happy with you when their house doesn't sell the first day that it goes on the market, if that's what the news was saying everybody else's was. I just wanted to ask a quick question, since I am, and I appreciate everybody jumping on today, and I plan on continuing to do this every month. Is there any other information that we didn't talk about that you've heard about, or that you have questions about, that we could, you know, that I could get together and have ready for next month?
Yeah, I do have a question.
Yeah.
Troy, what are you hearing out there as far as predictions of where they think interest rates will start to level off at? Have you heard anything in particular? Are they going to exceed 8%? I've heard that number come in and out a few times, but you know, I think that's the kind of the question is have you heard from one way or the other what the thought process is and how the recession will affect the housing market?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody knows. I've heard lots of predictions. I mean, I've heard as high as 10%. And I think the reality is mortgage interest rates are largely dictated by the market. So the Fed funds rate, which is what we hear all about in the news, which is what the Federal Reserve actually has the power to change, that impacts short-term lending. So like car loans, credit cards, lines of credit, things like that, that change basically they're priced off of the Fed funds rate, which is the overnight borrowing rate. But mortgage rates are based off of the 10-year treasury note, or at least they tend to follow that. And so that's largely determined by the market and how people, you know, how people are feeling about it typically. And I left the slide out because I felt like it got in the weeds a little bit, but it basically is where people go when they're not feeling really strongly about stocks, but they still want a return on their money. So the short answer is no one really knows. Like I said, I think people just think that it's going to keep going up. And I think a lot of it is going to depend on what the inflation numbers come back at. I mean, the Fed seems committed to continuing to raise rates across the board and do anything that they can to get rates up until inflation levels off. And so if I were, you know, trying to tell my clients, hey, this is something that you should be keeping an eye on, it would be looking for those inflation numbers to drop. We did go down in April compared to March in terms of a year-over-year percentage increase with inflation. But they measure inflation several different ways. So that was the overall index. The core index that they use sometimes that you may have heard about, that one did not, that one actually went up. So so that is so yeah, so there's a lot of information that kind of goes against each other. And so I would say at this point, the general consensus is that rates are going to keep going up until inflation gets into check. And no one really knows how high they're going to be willing to go. So I just realized there were 10 comments in the chat. So if anybody has anything that you want to ask, I'm all ears, but I'll start reading through this. Prices are still rising. We're getting fewer offers than before. Secondary home markets are first to take a hit. You guys were all having a conversation in here and I didn't even realize it. Kendra asks, give me a little bit, does this take into account those who have to requalify because of the increase in interest rates? I'm assuming you're talking about mortgage applications. And no, those are new mortgage applications. So typically people aren't filling out a brand new application. They may just be running different scenarios in that case. Anybody else have any specific questions? Or like I said, I mean, do you guys all have any interest in understanding like the difference between Fed funds rate and interest rates, or is that like way too far in the weeds and just not interesting to anybody?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So you had mentioned affordability. So you said go to Black Knight to figure out the current affordability rate. Is that correct?
Yes. So here are the sources that I use. And so if you go to blackknightinc.com, they do a monthly report. And then, so it looks like you guys do want to know about Fed funds rate versus interest rate. I might actually go find a guest for that can, I feel like I understand it well enough to be dangerous. But Alicia, yeah, this blackknightinc.com, you can go and find the report. But also when we talk about, I saw some things in here about interest rate. If you've never been to mortgagenewsdaily.com, they actually send out a daily email that just tells you kind of what happened in the mortgage market today and why it happened. And I've found that to be very, very valuable, especially when you have, hopefully everybody's got some active clients. And, if there's been a major shift in rates today, and you're going out to put an offer in on a property, you might have them reach out to their loan officer and just make sure that that payment hasn't changed enough to make a difference for them. And that mortgagenewsdaily.com is a great resource to just keep yourself up to date. And again, keep yourself as the local economist of choice. Anybody else have any specific questions that you wanted to go through or anything else that you'd like to hear about next time? No? All right. Well, I really super appreciate you guys jumping on. And I will put my email actually here in the chat. And if you want me to send you the slide deck, I'll be happy to do that. And yeah, we'll get that out to you. It has all these links in it here to the to all of the sources that I used for this information. And then, like I said, I plan on doing this every month, right around the same time, right around the middle of the month on Monday. So I will definitely be happy to do that. If you want to email me and ask me to make sure I send you out the invitation, I can probably just go ahead and create a Google Calendar invite and put everybody who wants the invitation on. And then that way it'll be an easy reminder for you. It'll be easier for all of us. So be happy to do that. But if you guys don't have any other questions, I appreciate you jumping on and we'll talk next month.